Hi guys, Andrew here with Headphones.com. Today we're going to take a look at the Audio-Technica ATH-R70x, which is a high impedance over-ear open-back dynamic driver headphone that comes in right at around $350. Now in this price bracket, it's pretty competitive. So in this video, we're going to see how it compares against the Sennheiser HD650, as well as the Hi-Fi Man Sundara. Let's check it out. Birds are fighting outside again. Let's move this a little closer this time. Cover the chest hair. Unless you want that. Creep. So let's get going with the review here, guys, and I'm going to start off with the usual stuff, which is the build quality, design, comfort, aesthetics, and all of that. And right away we can see that this headphone has a very unique design style to it, with these wings going on here. And normally you don't see that kind of thing. Normally you actually get cup extension, but with this one, they sort of didn't give you the cup extension. There is a little bit of swivel here, which is nice, but it also doesn't pivot either, which is, you know, depending on the shape of your head, it's potentially a bit of a deal breaker there. In order to get around this, the design style has instead gone for this wing system, which it's a little bit unconventional and a little bit awkward, but it's also potentially quite comfortable because this is an extremely lightweight headphone. And then, you know, the top piece here is just one solid piece of metal. So for the build quality, this doesn't feel particularly premium, but you can actually tell that it's made out of solid materials here. So it doesn't feel like it's going to break. It feels actually quite sturdy, even if there just isn't that much material in general, and it feels quite lightweight. I think a lot of people will often associate, you know, good build with heavier, you know, thicker, more robust materials. And this is not that, but it still feels like it's well built and it's going to last a long time. And again, I think it also demonstrates the benefits of these types of materials here. You know, just because something has plastic on it, that's not actually a bad thing. You know, the wings here and all this is plastic. I think if anything would wear out, it's these pieces here, more than anything to do with, you know, the cup or actually the pivot points or anything like that. So when I wear it, it looks like this. And you can see how the wings have kind of like expanded a little bit up there, right? For me, it's somewhere in between reasonably comfortable and a little bit awkward, because I do feel the pressure of the wings a little bit, right on the top and the side a little bit, kind of where the wing comes into contact there and puts the most pressure on. But it's not really that big a deal, and over time I was able to get used to it. The nice thing about it is that there are no hot spots on top, which some people do get with just regular headbands. So this is one way of alleviating that issue. I like the black. You know, I like the no nonsense. This is the kind of headphone aesthetically that speaks to me because it's a very, you know, extra regular, nothing crazy, dead inside kind of look. You guys know what I like. Giggity. For the pads, there's nothing really all that special to say. They do come off like this, and you can see there's the driver going on, which is, it looks similar to the driver that you see in other Audio-Technica headphones, so that's pretty cool. A little bit of foam there, you know, around it. And but this pad is quite comfortable, and I have no issues with the pad construction and design. They've got these little notches that allow you to, you know, get the pad on a little bit more easily. Seemingly, I'm failing at this. Now, we'll get into the sound quality here shortly. I just wanted to mention the cable. The cable is a little bit on the long side, I think, but that's not really an issue. And I do like this cable better than the one that comes with the Sennheiser HD650. This is not as stiff, you know, it's a little bit more pliable. So it's not a particularly noteworthy cable, just, you know, it's okay. It'll do. And for the connectors on here, you have what appears to be 3.5 millimeter, but there is this little locking mechanism in here you can see here on the side of the connector. So what happens when you attach it, I'll just show you here. You kind of hook it up like this, and then you twist it a little bit, and then it locks into place. So it's not going to rip the cable end out of the connector here. Now, let's talk about the sound quality here, and I'm going to begin by talking about all the objective stuff and the measurements. And I'm going to throw the graphs up on the screen here for you guys, done on the Gross 43AG standardized measurement rig. But you know, I just have to remind everybody once again that the target curve I'm using here is just a known data point. It's a reference point. It's not the only indicator for good sound. There are places where it should deviate from the target, and there are also places where it's okay if it does. But just So once again, so everybody's aware, this is just a known data point, and there's more to good sound than just adherence to a target. But without further ado, let's get into the measurements now. And with this headphone, it's actually quite interesting. There are two different measurement results that I got quite commonly depending on the position of the headphones on the rig. And I was actually able to replicate this, just subjectively to, I was putting on my head and listening and kind of, changing the position and the angle a little bit. So I think the sound that you're going to get, or the exact sound signature you're going to get, is going to depend a little bit on how it's worn on the head. Which is, I guess, unsurprising, but this one a little bit more significantly than you might find with other headphones. But let's first talk about the bass here. And as with most open back dynamic driver headphones, you do see a little bit of bass roll off in the sub bass, which is sort of to be expected here. You can see on the graph, there's a drop off right at around 30, 40 hertz, but that's not all that uncommon. And not unlike what's going on with the HD650, this has a little bit of forwardness there to the upper bass, mid bass and upper bass. Not in a way that's overbearing, and I actually think that it kind of suits this headphone quite well, given that it doesn't have the ultra low, sub bass extension there that you get with certain planars. And so this gives it a little bit of body and richness of tone at the cost of maybe a hint of boom there, depending on the kind of music that you're listening to and which frequencies get tokened dominantly for bass. Moving into the mids, the tonal balance for this headphone in the mid range is just fantastic. All the way up until the upper mids. Just for the overall mid-range balance, I got to get that out there. This is better than what you get on the HD650, because with the 650, it's a little forward there at around like 1.5K, kind of like in the vocal presence region, which is potentially a little bit pleasant, but it also causes that veil. And with the R70X, you don't have that veil. So that's quite nice. But then when you get to the transition between the upper mids and treble, you'll notice that the treble is a little relaxed. It means your S's, F's, and T's, your sibilant tones, are not going to be piercing whatsoever. They're actually going to be quite smooth. That also has the effect of kind of making that upper mid-range forwardness a little bit more noticeable. Now, I'm not going to say this is particularly shouty, but it just borders on shout just a hint. And you hear this on electric guitars, on male vocals occasionally as well. But again, depending on the type of music that you're listening to, that's not going to be an issue, right? It was only when I got into my garbage music that I really started to notice it. But as I mentioned, the rest of the treble there, it's a little bit pulled back and a little bit subdued, only really comes back in the upper treble. So what you have here is a generally neutral presentation with a little bit of warmth there. So like neutral with a hint of bloom, and a hint of forward character there for the upper mids. But the frequency response here, I think, is generally excellent. And, as long as you're not listening to particularly aggressive music, I think this is going to be quite good for its overall tonal balance. There's no harmonic imbalances anywhere that I can hear with this. I also want to let you guys know, though, that the other result that I got for this, depending on the positioning on the rig and also on my head when I was listening to it subjectively, it was quite different there in the transition between the upper mids and treble. And, depending on what you're more sensitive to, it's actually a little better there. So for the positioning where the headphone is positioned a little bit higher on my head, the tonal balance that I got was actually a little bit pulled back at around 5, 6K, but then 7 and 8K was, a lot more present. And this meant that the upper mids, yes, they're still forward, but they're balanced out a little bit better by that mid treble. So if you have a chance to try this headphone and you're hearing a little bit of shout there, or a little bit of forwardness there, or honk, I don't know what else you want to call it, that I think can be mitigated by, changing the positioning a little bit, up or down, and the wings are there kind of to accommodate for that a little bit. It allows you to do that a little bit. But overall, the frequency response here gets top marks from me, because this isn't something that I think needs EQ at all. If you want to EQ it, I think you can, and the things that I would change are either kind of pull back some of the upper mids there at around 3K, or boost the lower to mid treble, depending on the positioning that it's at, on your head. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the subjective stuff here, and this is where things are going to get a little bit controversial, I think, because to be honest, I don't think this is particularly detailed, but I have to stress that this headphone has strengths and weaknesses as far as the technical performance goes. And depending on what you value or what you index for, this is going to potentially still be a very desirable headphone. In particular, if you're looking for a headphone that has a very wide soundstage, then this is something to consider. It doesn't have the most forward depth or the most even distribution of images. It's fine there, but it's more about, soundstage width, and, I could hear the instruments just going very far out to the sides, which was quite nice, and it sounded very open as a result. And a very open and natural kind of presentation there for stage. However, when it comes to structural definition of the images, image separation, and the ability to sort of peer into the music a little bit more, if you think about like what planars do really well, and honestly what the 650 does really well, and 600 as well, the sense of instrument separation with this headphone, in spite of the fact that it has a wide soundstage, it's just not there. And the images, they sort of kind of blend together a little bit. So if you're looking for something ultra incisive, that's not this headphone. I would look more at this Sundara and the 650 and 600 for those. This one is definitely a little bit more on the cluttered side, a little bit more on the hazy side. And things just sort of become more of a wall of sound. So I found that when, listening to jazz tracks and classical tracks, that wasn't that much of an issue, but definitely you could notice that this wasn't particularly detailed. And when I moved to rock and metal, where there's a lot of busy passages, it just doesn't have the control to be able to isolate the individual lines at all. And so in some sense, that's okay because, if you think about when you're at a concert and you're listening, that's kind of normal. You don't really get that kind of incisiveness anyways. But, the flip side is I like that quality in headphones. I think a lot of people do. And when it comes to just hearing more, this isn't going to do that for you. Lastly, when it comes to that sense of punch and impact and slam, no, this also doesn't have that going on at all. However, I did try this off of quite a wide range of amplifiers, including some crazy high-end tube amplifiers. I used this off of the Amps & Sound Kenzie out of the 300 ohm tap there, and it did scale, and I did find that I got actually quite a good sense of impact down low, and you did get some of that tube character coming through. However, even though this is a 420 ohm headphone or a high impedance headphone, it didn't scale as well as the HD650. And when I was comparing this headphone out of a number of those high-end amplifiers, including the Rebel Amp, the SPL Phonitor X, the Kayana HA6, the Amps & Sound Kenzie, in every situation, as much as this did change a little bit, the HD650 changed more. And the HD650 always had a better sense of separation, incisiveness, and detail. Now, it never got to the sense of soundstage width that this has, but at the same time, it was overall the more enjoyable experience for me. And that's probably because, for me, that soundstage quality is not as important as structural definition for the images and incisiveness and detail. But for you, it might be. But in any case, I've been mainly comparing this against the HD650 in this video, and I should also compare this against a few more. The Hi-Fi-Man Sundara, I think, is, at least the 2020 version, is just flat out better than this in just about every way, except for soundstage. It's got a slightly more neutral balance overall for its frequency response, and it can handle a sub-bass shelf there a little bit better if you're going to add EQ. And then also the incisiveness and the separation qualities on the Sundara are just simply better than what's going on here. But of course, that's a planar magnetic headphone, and there are a lot of folks who just don't like planars, and they don't like the planar timbre. And so then this is, sort of seen often as a dynamic driver, equivalent to that, which also has is a very good frequency response. However, the other comparison that I think is worth making with this headphone is the Sennheiser HD560S, which is quite a bit less expensive than this. It's only around $200, and the HD560S has better bass extension, not as much bloom in the bass. I'd say it's actually just more neutral overall. The only real downside with the 560S is that it's a little bit sharp there in the lower treble, or like 4 or 5, 6K, that area. And it sounds a bit intense there. Whereas on this headphone, the R70X, it's quite a bit more relaxed in that region. So if you are treble sensitive and you are looking for neutrality, this is something to consider. And lastly, when it comes to the sense of detail there, I would kind of put this on the same playing field there. You know, they're both good at soundstage. I actually think this is a little wider. The R70X is a little wider, but the 560S is a little more filled in, and just overall, I think has a little bit more of a balanced in-head localization, at least for me. And so I think that brings me to my conclusion here. Do I recommend the Audio-Technica R70X? So generally, yes, this is a well-balanced and good-sounding headphone, especially because of its frequency response and its tonal balance. It is generally pleasant to listen to. Its only issue, I think, is that around the $350 price mark, you have very strong competition now, and below as well. You know, to my ear, this doesn't quite have the detail chops to hang with the HD600, HD650, and Hi-Fi Man Sandara, even though across the board, this has a very pleasant and potentially more desirable frequency response depending on what you're looking for. So my conclusion is yes, it's good. I do recommend it, but I also don't think it's the crazy value, proposition that some of these other headphones are in this price range. But of course, for those of you guys who are a little bit treble sensitive and you want a little bit of forward upper bass there, and you want a generally pleasant sound signature that's got a very wide sense of in-head localization and space, then this headphone does fit the bill there, and I am going to recommend it for people looking for that. But that does it for this video. Thanks for taking the time to watch it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.